So basically, she's explaining how Walter is one of the Cunninghams, that they never take anything they can't pay back. They don't have much, but they get along with it. And actually, she has memories of the Cunningham tribe because her father represented the Cunninghams when they got themselves into trouble with something called an entailment. Entailment is when the government prevent the next generation from inheriting the land. There was some kind of a legal disagreement, which means that there's a lien on the land and the children can't inherit it. I mean, this is just a legal thing. It's not something you need to know. But you have to understand that Atticus represented the Cunninghams. He helped them. They weren't able to pay him. But at a certain point, they found something on their doorstep after the event, a sack of hickory nuts. There's a certain type of food. It was obviously from their farm. And this was, in the Cunningham's eye, this was how they paid Atticus back. And because he didn't have any money, they had no money at all. The Cunninghams really are an extremely poor family, and this is why Walter Cunningham comes to school with no food. There is no money for food. It's a very difficult thing for us to imagine, but we are living in a time where hunger was real. Okay, so now she goes back in time to the entailment, remembering what happened with Atticus, and then we go forward to the class, to Miss Caroline, and actually Scout tells Miss Caroline that she's embarrassing Walter by insisting that he takes the quarter and gives it back to her. And Miss Caroline at this point, I mean, her morning has been a complete disaster. She's trying to teach the kids the ABC, but they know it already. She doesn't have a clue what she's doing. She's making mistakes, and she is just decided to lash out at Scout instead of realizing that she probably did a bad job as a teacher. And so she now holds out her hand. She tells Scout to hold out her hand, and she gets hit by a ruler, which is standard punishment in those days, was to be slapped on the back of the hand with a ruler. This is all very ironic because this is a school, this is an educational establishment where children are supposed to be taught things, and Scout is very quickly getting the message that actually the kids seem to know more than Miss Caroline. They know more about the ABC than Miss Caroline can teach them, and they understand the kids and their background and how to treat them much better than Miss Caroline. And so at that point, Miss Blount comes in and starts trying to make order because everything's chaos. Then they're saved by the bell. The class leave. Miss Caroline sinks into her chair. She's absolutely desperate, and we do feel a bit sorry for her. Even the narrator almost feels sorry for her. Okay, so at this point, we're now on chapter 3. She catches Walter Cunningham in the schoolyard. And she's about to sort of make him feel bad. And Jem yells at him and tells him to leave him alone. Says that you're bigger than he is. But she says, he's as old as you, but he made me start off on the wrong foot. So she's blaming Walter for being yelled at by Miss Caroline. Okay, so then Jem wants to know what was going on, and Scout explains that he didn't have any lunch, and he's picking himself up, and Jem realizes that this is the Walter Cunningham whose dad gave them the sack of hickory nuts, and he invites Walter to have lunch with them. because he says that in some like naive, childish way, oh, our daddy's a friend of your daddy's, which isn't really the case. Their daddy helped his daddy in a legal point of view, but they're not really friends. And they bring Walter home with them. As they're walking back, they have a chat about Boo Radley. And Jem asks Walter if he's ever heard of them. And Walter tells the story that because of Boo Radley, he almost died because he ate the pecans. Folks said he poisoned them and put them on the school fence. We don't know if this is the case. It could have been that they were raw or something else, but obviously this perpetuates the whole story of Boo Radley, so it works very well in the way that they see him. Walter says, Jem shows off to Walter and says, I almost went up to his house in order to make himself look good in front of Walter. So they go home for lunch. Atticus is there. Atticus is very nice to Walter, and they start talking about crops, about the crops that grow in their fields. And Jem and Scout, because they don't really know, they don't have a farm, they don't understand these concepts, they can't follow the conversation at all. It's kind of sad. He tells Mr. Finch that he can't pass first grade. Walter Cunningham is the same age as Jem, but he's in the same class as Scout. Why? Because he never gets past first grade. Because he is helping his father, as I explained before. He helps him in the farm. And at the same time, Walter's piling lots and lots of food on his plate, and him and Atticus are talking like two men. And Jem and Scout are pretty much they're amazed. I mean, they didn't realise that Atticus knew all this stuff about farm problems. This shows us how Atticus is really part of the town, how he understands the business of the townsfolk, how he doesn't hold himself above anybody. We're going to get to know Atticus a lot throughout the story, and every time we come across a new incident with Atticus, we're going to see a new aspect of Atticus that we haven't yet discovered and that the children haven't yet discovered. So right now we see Atticus is somebody who understands other people, understands where they're coming from and can relate to them, where they're coming from. He's an educated man, he's a lawyer, but yet he can talk farm talk with young kids from simple farming families. Okay, so now we have an interesting incident where they have Calpurnia brings a syrup pitcher, okay, and Walter takes the syrup and he pours it on his vegetables and meat, as if he was like pouring milk into a glass. Now, this is like completely shocking for the kids. I mean, who pours syrup on like their main course? And then Scout, being the young, as young and kid, she just is very direct. She said, she asked him what the heck he's doing. And Atticus shakes his head and sort of says, no, leave him alone. And but Scout doesn't get the message and says, no, he's drowned his dinner in syrup. And then Calpurnia yells out that she should come to the kitchen. And she was very, very angry with Scout because Scout has done something terrible, which is to embarrass guests. Okay, this is a very cute description of Calpurnia. Calpurnia is an educated woman. She knows how to write and she can speak very nicely. But apparently when she becomes angry, she starts talking like a regular working class Negro. She has she changes the way she talks, and she says, there are some folks who don't eat like us, and but you ain't called on to contradict them at the table when they don't. The boy's your company, and if he wants to eat up the tablecloth, you let him, you hear? Right, so she's really, really giving it to Scout for her bad behaviour. And Scout has a response which says he's not company, he's a Cunningham. Remember what I said about the way there's a whole class system that works in Maycomb. So he's not company, he's a Cunningham. A Cunningham is a different category. You don't treat them the same way. And Calpurnia will not hear of it, and she says, you be quiet, anybody who's here is company, if you think you might be better than the Cunninghams, but if you disgrace them, you're just as bad. Here we get to see that Scout is getting a moral education. She's getting a moral education by seeing the example of her father and also by Calpurnia, who is quite a moral person. So she gets smacked, and she goes straight back into the dining room again. And then she gets her plate and she finishes her dinner in the kitchen, because actually she's quite relieved about it, because she would have to face Walter and she feels very embarrassed about what she said to him. Okay, so they went to school ahead, and she speaks to Atticus, and she's complaining again about Calpurnia, how Calpurnia likes Jem better than she likes me, and she even says to her, "Why don't you get rid of her? Why don't you stop hiring her as a maid?" And Atticus is not interested in what she has to say, and says that that Jem doesn't worry her as much as you do. So you deserve, saying to Scout, you deserve all the trouble you're getting from Calpurnia. And in any case, we couldn't operate a single day without Cal. Have you ever thought of that? You have to understand how much Cal does for you. We couldn't manage without her. So she's really pretty angry about this, and she walks to school, and then she's sort of getting stuck in her anger, and then she hears a scream, and she looks up, and she sees Miss Caroline, who's standing in the middle of the room, just completely horrified. Okay, so she starts screaming, "It's alive!" Okay, so all the boys come to help her. They think first of all it's a mouse, it's a little bug, it's an animal. They don't know what it is. And she is not pointing at the door or at the floor or anything like that. She's pointing at a kid that she doesn't know. And she's saying, they say to her, "What, you mean him?" And they say, "Yes." The kids say, "Yes, he's alive. Did he scare you some way?" And she says, she was just walking by when it crawled out of his hair. So she's not frightened by the kid. She's frightened by what came out of his hair. Okay, and it's there is actually a bug crawling out of this kid's hair. The kids are all very, they're all trying to help her out and calm her down. Again, we have this total role reversal in the class, right? The kids know how to deal with each other. The kids know about learning. But Miss Caroline is lost. So so they reassure her, and they tell her not to worry, and they go and get her water and everything. And she's and the kid he looks inside his hair. He locates his guest. He takes the little bug between his two fingers and pulls it out, and she just can't believe what she's seeing. And she asks him his name. And he says, "Who, me?" And she nods. And his name is Boris Ewell. Okay, we have to remember the name Ewell. Ewell will come back up later on in the book and become a very important part of this story. But our first encounter with Boris Ewell is very unpleasant. This is a boy who has bugs crawling in his hair. He's also very big, which means that he's skipped first grade a lot of times. He's never been able to get on in school. Okay. So she asks him to spell her name. He doesn't actually know how to spell his name. He just knows that at home they call him Boris. And she tells him that she's going to excuse him and let him go home for the rest of the afternoon to wash his hair. Okay, and she looks for a remedy for the bugs in his hair. I guess it's lice or something. And she says, "Here, you could treat your scalp with kerosene." Kerosene is a type of it's a type of oil that would get rid of the bugs. And he doesn't understand it. He really doesn't understand what she's going on about. And then we have a description of Boris Ewell. Boris Ewell is absolutely disgustingly dirty. He has, his neck is grey, the backs of his hands are rusty, his fingernails are black, right? This is the type of people that nowadays would be called white trash. They are the lowest of the low in Maycomb society. They are not educated, they have no money whatsoever, and they live as close to animals as you're going to get. She says to him, please bathe yourself before you come back tomorrow, to which he laughs and says, I'm done for my time of year. I was on the verge of leaving. And she doesn't understand him. Then he explains. Well, actually, he doesn't explain. One of the other members of the class, once again, they're explaining to Miss Caroline how things work. She says he's one of the Yules, right? And as if she's supposed to understand what that means. And then they explain that what happens is these Yules don't go to school. The truant lady is a person who is responsible for kids who don't go to school, to make them sure they go to school, someone from the welfare office. They come here because she threatens to report them, okay? And basically, the law says that they have to come and enroll on the first day of first grade, so they do that, and then they don't come back to school again. And so Miss Caroline's, she's completely shocked. She said, what about the parents? And they explain that there's no mother, and the father's really not a nice person, contentious, somebody with a temper. And Boris Yule, he kind of thinks this is a compliment. He says, I've been coming to school for the first day of first grade for 3 years in a row. And I think if I'm smart this year, they're going to promote me to second grade. And Miss Caroline tells him to sit down, and she realizes that then that she's made a big mistake, because he gets angry with her. You know, you don't tell me to sit down. You try and make me Mrs. And one of the kids, little Chuck, gets up and says, let him go. He's mean, he's scary. He might start up a fight with you. And Boris Yule turns towards him, but Chuck is, even though he's really, really little, he tells him to watch out. He said, I'd soon killers look at you. Now go home. So this little kid, who's half the size of Miss Caroline, is telling Boris that he's going to go home, and he's not afraid of him. And Boris is actually afraid of this child. And Miss Caroline then takes advantage of the situation, and she says, go home. If you don't, I'll call the principal. So he goes and leaves. And then he's going to have his peace before he walks out the door. And he says, report and be damned ye. Ain't no snot-nosed slut of a school teacher born to make me do nothing. You ain't going to make me go nowhere, missus. You just remember that. You ain't making me go nowhere. And she starts crying, because this is very abusive. And in those days, teachers weren't used to hearing students speak like that. And so then he leaves. And now, once again, the class are trying to make her feel better. And they're trying to tell her, well, we enjoyed your story, and don't worry about him. It's very, very ironic. But this is a very strong message to us as the reader. Our narrator, Scout, who's come, this is her first day of first grade, right? And this is the only description we're going to have in almost the whole book, except at the end, of what school is like. We're getting a very strong message here that she has nothing to learn from being in class. That her real lesson in life is somewhere else, not here. Okay, so on her way home, she passes the Radley place, and she's running past it, and she feels very depressed, because if this is the beginning of the school year, then what the heck is going to be for the rest of the school year? She cannot imagine spending 9 months not reading or writing. That just makes her want to run out of school. They run up and they see Atticus coming home from work, and that's what they usually do. They meet him as he's turning around the post office, and he has forgiven Scout for her rudeness at lunchtime, and he's asking her questions about school. She doesn't answer that much. He says, my replies were monosyllabic, so she just would say to him, yes, no, okay. Calpurnia also senses that she didn't have a good day at school, so she closes her eyes. She tells her to close her eyes, open her mouth, and she's made something very delicious called crackling bread. And she tells him that she tells Scout, Calpurnia tells Scout that she missed her, and that the house was quiet and lonely. So we see that even though maybe Scout complains about her and everything, she does love her very much, and she is a motherly figure, and she takes care of her, and she gives her a kiss, and then she runs off, and after supper, Atticus sits down with the paper and says, "Scout, ready to read?" And Scout just falls to pieces. She walks away, and Atticus follows her and says, "Something wrong?" And she tells Atticus she doesn't feel well. She gives him an excuse, and that she'd really not like to go to school anymore if it's all right with him. Atticus sits on the swing. He looks at his watch, and he's just quiet for a minute. And Scout says to Atticus, "You didn't go to school. You're all right. And, I won't go to school. You can teach me like Granddaddy taught you and Uncle Jack." And Atticus says he can't. He's got to go to work. And now it's against the law not to go to school. And he offers her medicine, magnesia, for her to feel better. And now magnesia is not the most delicious medicine in the world. So she says, "No, I'm feeling okay. Don't have to worry about me." And then he asks her what really happened at school. And she tells him about everything that happened at school, about her not being able to read anymore. And she begs him not to send her back. And Atticus walks to the end of the porch. He looks at the one of the plants, and he comes back. And he says something which is a very, very important saying, which is something that we will be seeing again and again in the book as Scout grows up and discovers that the world is a very different place to what she thought it was. He tells somebody tells her that she has to know one simple trick, and then she can get on with everybody. She can get on with the kids in the school and the teacher and everybody. She says, "You can never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." Until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. And he says to Scout that she's learned a lot today, and that Miss Caroline had also learned a lot. And she learned not to hand something to a Cunningham, and Walter and her have to understand that it was an honest mistake, that Miss Cunningham just didn't know what she was doing, and she can't be expected to learn Makeham's ways in one day. It's not her fault. And then she says, "Yeah, but it wasn't my fault that I read, and she held me responsible, and I don't want to go to school." And then she remembers Boris Yule, that he only comes to school first day. She reminds him. And she says, "Why can't I do that? Why can't I do what Boris Yule does? He comes the first day of school, and that's it." He says, "Sometimes it's better to bend the law a little in special cases. In your case, the law remains rigid. So to school you must go." For Scout, she has to go to school, and that's the end of it. Now we hear the story of the Yules. The Yules had been the disgrace of Maycomb for 3 generations, and none of them had done an honest day's work that he'd ever remembered. He said that some Christmas, when he was getting rid of the tree, he'd like to take Scout with him and show her where and how they lived. They were people, but they lived like animals. He says it very cutely. "They can go to school anytime they want to, when they show the faintest symptom of wanting an education." For all of a sudden, if they feel like getting an education, then they can go. But it doesn't make any sense. You cannot force people like the Yules. It doesn't make any sense to put them into an educational environment. And she says, "Yeah, if I didn't go to school, you'd force me to." Atticus says, "You are of the common people, you have to obey the law. You do not fit into the same category as the Yules. The Yules are in a different society, different rules apply to them." And even like Mr. Yule, he's allowed to hunt and trap out of season. Hunting and trapping is not allowed in certain seasons, but he's above the law in certain ways. And Scout, in her naive ways, says that's bad. And Father says, yes, it is against the law. But if a man, and this is very sad, if a man spends his relief check, so Mr. Yule gets money from the government, like welfare, Bituach Leumi from the government, and he spends it on green whiskey, the type of illegal alcohol, and his children have a way of crying from hunger pains. He doesn't know of anybody who's not going to allow the children, to eat the game, eat the animals that the father catches, even though it's during a time when he's not allowed to catch them. And Scout says he shouldn't do that. And he says to Scout very seriously, but are you going to make his children suffer from the fact that he's doing something wrong? And she says no. But then she goes back to this thing, if I go to school, I won't be able to read anymore. For her, like not being able to read, that's just the worst thing ever. And Atticus says we're going to have a compromise. We're going to have an agreement here. It's not bending the law. But if you decide that you're going to understand that you have to go to school, we're going to read every night just like we did. Is that a deal? And she's thrilled and she says, yes, that's a deal. And we'll consider it sealed without the usual formality. Atticus has a way of speaking in a very in lawyer-like terms. He is a lawyer and he uses legal language even when he's speaking to his kids. And he is formal with them and he is distant with them. But at the same time, he has their interests at heart. He wants what's best for them. And this is an interesting relationship that we'll see will develop, where he's not your typical loving father, but at the same time, he deeply cares for them. And he tells Scout, don't tell anyone at school about it because you're going to get into trouble. And he said, I never went to school. But I have a feeling if you tell them we read every night, she's really going to start yelling at me, and I don't want to get into trouble with her. And then for us, the rest of the evening, Atticus is reading articles from the newspaper in a very, very serious voice, which is like a very strange and crazy stories, like a man who sat on a flagpole on the top of a flag of a building for no reason, and he reads it in this very formal voice, and that has them absolutely, rolling about with laughter. And he apparently, this man would have sat there all night had Atticus not stopped him from getting food. So that was that, and for some reason, the next Saturday, because of what Atticus read out about the man sitting on the flagpole, Jem decides to he decides to sit on top of the treehouse all day, and he would have stayed there all night. And Atticus tells him he can't eat anything unless he comes down. The person on the top of the flagpole, that was just a story. There was nothing about the food. Cutting the food, that was Atticus's idea when Jen decides to put himself on the treehouse. So we have, mixed with the classic stories of childhood and things that you remember about being a child, we have some very, very serious ideas going on as well. And we're also getting an introduction to the people of the town and how there are many, many unwritten rules about how the town is run and who the people in the town are and what they can and can't do.